see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
So hi, it's Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on how to build a culture of empathy. And today I'm here with Srinath. Thanks for joining me. So your name is Srinath Clayton Barker, so I should mention that kind of your full name, and I guess you have a new kind of given name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, we've known each other for quite a while, and I guess, kind of describe you. I guess you're sort of a seeker, and kind of been doing a lot of different types of restorative work and different restorative processes, and now you're also starting to teach some workshops, as I understand it. And you have a website, co-creatingconnection.wordpress.com. So I'll just show that on the screen here. And that's your main website, is that right?
Yeah, it's the one I've been having the opportunity to serve.
So, well, these dialogues are about how do we build a culture of empathy, and I've been starting them off with asking people what their most important values are. So, what would you say for you is your most important value?
Just one? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, kind of the top one.
Yeah, liberation.
Liberation. Okay. And how did that become important to you? Like, if you kind of scan back through your life, it's like, at what point did kind of liberation become important to you?
It's probably been some time. This lifetime and the countless others of seeking freedom from the world of suffering. I remember when I was about 7, I just intuitively started to learn how to practice meditation on my own, and I was very interested in building altars with mindfulness. And I remember one time I got a fever and I was quite sick, and during the fever I had a dream, and I remember in the dream that I kept running around being really concerned about my family and the world and wanting to protect everyone. And I came to a mirror in the dream, and I looked in the mirror and I suddenly started screaming in horror. And I remember just also seeing all this incredible amount of light, and I was afraid of myself and afraid of all that light. And I remember just having the most intense feeling of wanting freedom from the horror, the terror, the fear, and the wandering around looking for a refuge. So that was one of the earliest memories I had. Of course, I was also born with my umbilical cord wrapped around my neck, and I had whatever that fecal matter is that a baby might have in their mouth. So it's been, quite meaningful to have been very interested in communication, compassionate communication, empathic communication, right speech for some time. And of course, I was born with my umbilical cord wrapped around my mouth and poop in my mouth. So I've been learning how to unwrap those cords and get the dirt out of my mouth ever since.
Oh, yeah, well, that's an interesting story. Well, what we're exploring here is kind of the experience of empathy, and I'm interested in how do we build a culture of empathy, and maybe we can connect it to your value of liberation and kind of addressing fear and kind of getting the poop out of your mouth. So, I guess so. But to start with. I guess we just talk about empathy. What do you think about building a culture of empathy, and do you think that's even something that we should try to do?
I love that question. Well, I as a student and as a seeker, like you mentioned, seeking spiritual freedom and trying to understand what that means. I can say that most of what I would have to share today is things that I've heard from other wise people, saints, sages, teachers, masters, other journey people on this journey of compassion and empathy. And I want to speak about what I've learned about from them, but I'm horribly afraid of misquoting them as I've done before, and I don't want to misconstrue their ideas, but I also don't want to steal their ideas without giving them credit. So, in terms of what do I think about building a culture of empathy, well, one of the ideas that I've been learning from reading the Bhagavad Gita and Krishna's advice to Arjuna on the battlefield, and also Amma talks about this, and some other swamis that I've met, is in terms of building a culture of empathy. To me, it seems really important to remember who the builder is. And I think the divine necessarily, inherently, in its infinite loving compassion, from what I know of it so far, the little I've been able to experience of it, just wants to love. And so I think that the divine wants to do that through us humans, whether we want to collaborate with the divine or not.
Uh-huh.
And I think if we can really choose to surrender to that love that wants to come through all beings, then life would be heavenly on this planet. And certainly with 30 wars still going on, 190 million people living in slums in India, over 856 million people in India living on less than $2 a day, number of famines still going on, the high incarceration rates in the United States and the high murder rates, the amount of plastic floating in the oceans, the temperatures on the planet reaching exorbitant degrees. There being a rainstorm in the Middle East during 109-degree weather recently, 5 significant natural disasters between June 25th and June 30th of 2012. Certainly, collaborating with the divine and collaborating with Mother Earth and all beings would lead to life being more wonderful. So, in terms of the pace around doing this, I'm not really sure. I've just listened to one talk by a Swami last night who was mentioning about a story he read from a sage who was speaking about the Kali Yuga, this age of materialism and destruction, before the Kali Yuga ever started. And he was saying that we have about 460,000 years to go of this age of materialism before a major shift happens. So it's profound to hold that cultural story while also hearing these stories from Barbara Marx Hubbard and the Shift Network around the birth canal of 2012. And how do we know which sages to believe at this time on the planet? I think all we can do is be present and try our best.
Well, let me get back to the empathy part a little bit. So what I'm just kind of hearing here is you're just seeing all these different problems out there in the world and want to kind of get connected to kind of a deeper inner divinity, it sounded like. And that's what you were saying when I asked you about a culture of empathy. So maybe are you saying that a culture of empathy is kind of connecting with that inner, or that with the divine?
Yeah, from the feedback that I've gotten from life so far is that the amount to which we can build a culture of empathy is based on how much we're connecting with that empathy from within. And what I was really trying to say is that I've been learning from these teachers that remembering who the doer is, or who the empathizer is with the empathy, or who's actually the builder of the culture. I think if we remember that that's empathy itself rather than any of the forms that it comes through, any of the humans that it comes through, then we're likely to actually build a culture of empathy. If we are not conscious of who the doer is, or who the empathizer is, or who the builder is when we're building, empathizing, or doing, then we're likely to repeat what empathy is not, which is ego. And so that's just coming into my awareness and consciousness, remembering that recently in the last few years. And so how to remember that ongoingly without breakage is something I'm really interested in.
Uh-huh. So, well, another way of looking at empathy, I guess you kind of get into the definitions of what people mean by empathy. And I find one way of kind of exploring it is kind of metaphorically. The definition of empathy is often just a metaphor of standing in someone else's shoes and looking through someone else's eyes.
Mm,
And so, if we look at it kind of metaphorically, what is empathy like to you as a metaphor? I could just say for me, it's like a cornucopia in the
yes.
sense that it opens this door of all these different experiences that I would not have otherwise.
Ah, I was thinking about that definition. There's a truck that's about to pull up in some dogs, so I just want to pause here.
I might mention that you're actually on a smartphone here. So this is, I think, the first interview I've done on a smartphone, and it actually works pretty well. So
All right.
I'm quite pleased with the quality.
Yeah. So,
A metaphor was
I was thinking about your metaphor of standing in someone else's shoes, and I was thinking, does that metaphor work? And in terms of a human-centric or an anthropocentric understanding of empathy, that metaphor works very fine for me. And then I was thinking, well, what if what I want to empathize with doesn't wear shoes? Or what if what I want to empathize with doesn't even have feet? And so I was thinking about how do I articulate a metaphor for the empathy that's universal? Because I think at this time, especially on Mother Earth, with the footprint that humans are having, we've really lost connection to our kinship relationships with rivers, lakes, clouds, the rain, oceans, the animals, the winged ones. So I guess the metaphor that's coming right now is the picture of Mother Earth just as a big circle with green life on it, brown mountains, blue oceans. Just seeing this whole community of life in a whole with all this infinite space around it. It's like we're living in that metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the metaphor is empathy is like the whole earth, the wholeness of it.
Yes.
And it's because because for empathy is like it's beyond people just with shoes. It's a whole empathy with all of the whole planet, all of life, and its wholeness, something like that.
Yes, I mean, if we look at a river, it lets us step into it. Or if we go into the ocean, it comes up and greets us with its waves, and washes us. The sun is shining. It never asks for anything in return. It just gives all of its light. A dog will come up and nuzzle you or bark at you. Both is empathy, as far as I understand. And I was thinking about empathy in terms of emp and path. And I was thinking empty path. Like empathy is when the sense faculties are, we have these eyes, ears, nose, touch, taste. When we lessen the amount of fixed ideas that we have with these senses, and we're getting beyond attachments to our likes and our dislikes with the senses, from what I'm learning from Amma and these other swamis, then our senses are more empty, and then we can empathize from that clear channel. We can learn how to be instruments of empathy, instruments of the divine energy that empathy is.
Yeah, so it's kind of like clearing. If you have all these judgments and preconceived ideas, they kind of act as like blocks to empathy, and the empathy is this is how I'm understanding it. Then the empathy is really connecting to others and all of life in kind of a felt sense of being, something like that.
Yes, for me, the two biggest blocks to empathy that I've found are my own opinions and attachments to the ideas of I and mine. or I'm not that and that's not mine, or I am this or that is mine. From what I've been learning from these sages and meditation teachers, those are my two biggest blocks, and 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 I would really love to be able to continuously be able to stay connected to the universal empathy that's always omnipresent and eternal and never not goes away. So that's why liberation from any breakage from that experience is what I'm interested in.
Well, that breakage, I mean, what I kind of see there is that it's maybe the fear that, as you know, you kind of mentioned that earlier about liberation for you seemed to be about the nature of fear, right? The kind of fear comes into our awareness and it kind of shrinks our sense of connection. So maybe, I mean, that's kind of what I'm just kind of seeing. I don't know if that's kind of how you're seeing it, but it's kind of like, how do we connect what you were saying previously, your sense of wanting freedom and liberation from, from kind of this negativity. You're kind of using the metaphor of, the shit in the mouth and fear were two kind of qualities.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I understand your question right, but certainly when I've been in the presence of an empathic presence that's fully connected to the universe ongoingly, then the fear can dissolve. These, dark balls of non-empathy that are in my mouth start to dissolve and disappear. You can learn how to communicate with kinder words. So much of my path has been really experiencing what empathy is not, both for my own actions and with other people, then learning how to see, okay, the consequences of me taking that action didn't serve the kind of natural love and giving that I know is who I really am. So how do I learn how to be kinder? How do I learn how to speak more empathically? How do I be able to just not get distracted by the changing, diverse forms all the time and still hear the love inside, what anyone's saying? And I was thinking that some of the people who've taught me the most about empathy are the people who become the most angry with me. People who are not experts in empathy at all, I might judge. People who get angry and maybe who kill or harm other people, I learn a lot about empathy from them. And so one of the things that is one of my growing edges, I'm learning how to overcome my fears around this, is building a culture of empathy with the people who I experience as being the most angry and the most violent. I think learning how to build a culture of empathy from them might be really wonderful. There might be some jewels and ideas, precious ideas on how to build empathy, because maybe hurt people because they haven't experienced empathy, so they could tell me very quickly what it is that they'd like.
Do you have any stories of when that happened? Any actual anecdotes that you recall?
Yeah, one time I was working in a jail, and I was accompanying my friend who was teaching a class based on nonviolent communication. We were doing an empathic role play with the giraffe and the jackal puppets and using formal nonviolent communication process, guessing feelings and needs. And we were talking about a conflict. We were role-playing a conflict about a housing addition costing a lot of money and having a big ecological footprint, and maybe having materials that were made by people who might work in sweatshops or low-cost factories around the world. And we're role-playing this in the middle of about 20 men who are incarcerated. And we did it, and the room is just kind of dead. Like, no one's really connecting to our role play. And this man turns to me and says, "Are you kidding me? You think I'm going to do that on the street where I live? I can't use all this feelings and needs words. What is this stuff, man? I can't use all that. That's just too beautiful. Do you know where I live? People are getting shot. People are getting killed. I can't use this stuff. What is this?" And and he was like feeling pretty hot and annoyed because he wanted something that was much more engaging, I was guessing. And I just said, so it sounds like you want something that you know is going to work in your neighborhood and you can trust it. Is that what you're saying? And he was like, yeah, now you're starting to understand me. And so just by him telling me what wasn't working for him and what he would like to see happen, I learned a great deal about learning and not teaching exactly, but more learning about how to be a better servant. And one of the things I've learned from my teacher, and I hope I'm not misquoting her, is that the world doesn't need more leaders, we need more servants. So part of learning how to build a empathic culture for me is unlearning how to be a leader and discovering how to be a servant.
Yeah. Well, that kind of goes a little bit in parallel with something I've been thinking about is in terms of being a servant. There's in society there's a lot of people want to be a leader. It's like, here's my ideas, follow my ideas. And the servant is really the one that's modeling empathy and just out there listening to people and actually being empathic and because everybody seems to want to be heard, and there's this whole competition for being heard. And there's, to build a culture of empathy, we have to somehow get out there and just hear people.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that when I've attempted to try to contribute to empathic culture, I've not always remembered the temporary nature of the forms. And what I'm noticing is that even if we look at the human birth cycle, we have a creation of the human, we have the human life where it's sustained and protected for a certain amount of time, and then this human life gets destroyed and meets death. And to me, it seems like empathy just keeps spiraling through all of it, even when the forms come and go. And so one of the things that's helping me learn how to listen is being aware of my own presumptions and expectations, and actually seeking to foresee many possible scenarios of what might happen when I choose to go engage with something, so that I can meet it with less expectation and less presumption, less attachment to my own opinions. And that seems to be giving more space to non-react and be with what is.
Do you mean like, is that like the forms? Like if you have like NVC or any of these other forms, instead of kind of having attachment to the form, you just try to just be present and just kind of go with how people are? Or
I don't know if I'm the best expert to answer that question in any regards, because I have attachment to forms.
uh-huh.
There's forms that I resonate with, probably based on past habitual tendencies from other lifetimes or things I incorporated from various education systems I've gone through. So I think ultimately the people who have the most empathic presence on the planet get free of the forms, and they're able to just stay with the formless empathic oneness that's always there and never break connection, never move from the center of that. So it'd be so liberating if we could get to that place ongoingly.
Yeah. Well, I had this. I've recounted this story several times. On these dialogues. Is that once? You're familiar with Dominic Barter, and you've done his workshops. I was at one of his workshops, and in the process, there was a lot of empathic listening, and so I was being heard a lot, and I felt almost like my empathy battery kind of being charged and filled. Meaning, I was getting more grounded, more centered. I felt more space, within myself. And then the next day, I went to this freestyle dance I do here in Berkeley, and I kind of had that. I just was. This is a little bit different story, but I just would trying to mirror. I wanted to connect and hear people that were dancing and kind of be present with them. So I would do kind of mirroring of them, and I found that just having been grounded the day before, with all this empathic listening myself, I felt more able to connect with others and had less kind of like anxieties and all that. So that was kind of like one kind of a story of seeing the importance of kind of getting my own empathy batteries charged in terms of getting centered. And then the other time during the dance is I felt my own fears and anxieties. And I said, well, I'm kind of an anxious, I feel a lot of anxiety and with fear within myself. And I could feel it as kind of like a spike through the center of my body, like a black spike. And I said, instead of, just doing something else or kind of avoiding it, I want to really feel the essence of the fear. And so as I danced, I tried to get closer to it, wanting it to fill my consciousness, to be as present as possible. And I kind of got closer and closer to it, meaning it filled more of my consciousness. And at some point, it kind of just dissolved. And I kind of went through it, but it was only within like about 4 or 5 seconds, and a new fear came up. And this fear had a completely different form, an aesthetic form. It was a fear that was like an oppressive, heavy weight on me. And I did the same thing. I kind of stayed present. I said, okay, I want to go. I want to feel that. I want to get closer to it. And as I got closer to it, it eventually also dissolved. And so this dance was like an hour and a half dance. I was doing that on an ongoing basis. And at the end of the whole dance, I felt so relaxed, so open. Just, there was nothing I needed to do, it was. So the reason I'm bringing that story up is because you were talking about the fear. And there seems to be this relationship of empathy and how it relates to fear that's like kind of like core. And so, I think the question is how do we relate to fear? If there's a fear, do we try to squelch it and fight it and suppress it? Do we avoid it? Or do we come to it and kind of be present with it and empathize with the fear, be present with the fear and let it kind of, see it in its fullness. And that seems to be a way of actually transforming the fear, kind of moving past it. If it doesn't, kill you, there's probably fears that are pretty legitimate, like, some dog that's going to bite you or something, or, somebody's got a knife directly, so you might want to avoid. So I don't know. But there's this whole notion, not just notion, but experience. How do we relate with fears?
Yes. Yeah. I love this question. I really appreciate your story very much. I was very connected to it. I noticed my eyes were watering at one point just listening to the beauty of the learning experience that you had and then sharing it. And I just felt felt so connected. And I realized that everything that I've been speaking about and sharing about with this dialogue, that I really don't know too much about what I'm talking about. I'm still in the process of learning how to take these intellectual concepts that I've learned from so many masters and people around the world and non-experts who've given me the gift of their anger. That I'd be a fool to say that I know what I'm talking about. I'd also be a fool to blame myself for not knowing what I'm talking about. So, as you were talking about fear, what was coming to me that I think some of the, I think one of the ways that we can learn about building a culture of empathy is really look to ancient indigenous cultures that are still prominent on the planet, who've been leading a sustainable lifestyle for some time that is still around. And certainly the opportunity to live in India, 5,000-year-old culture, much of the science of yoga, and yoga is another way to say empathy, I think, from a Sanskrit perspective. We can look to these ancient indigenous cultures to understand empathy and also understand how to face fear. And I think one of the things that ancient indigenous place-based cultures that have a connection to the whole universe and a connection to both the individual self, the tribal community, the human community, and the universal community, like the holistic inclusion of all those layers. We look at ancient indigenous cultures, there's often rites of passage, initiations, many kinds of tests and trials to help people grow various kinds of sense perception, sense faculties, different kinds of capacities and intelligences. And all these cultures, would help people learn different ways of empathizing and different ways to face fear in many ways. If we learn about the sannyasa tradition from yoga, someone's seeking to go beyond body consciousness and basically does their own funeral rites as part of their initiation, drops themselves in the river, lets go of all their possessions. And that's an enormous experience of learning how to empathize with losing attachment to the identity, losing attachment to the I. And when you were talking about facing your fear, one of the practices that I've been learning, and I was at a Dharma talk the other night with a Swami from Ramakrishnananda Gurukula in India, here in Santa Fe. He was talking about how, Shankaracharya, one of the first acharyas in that lineage, he was basically training his students to tell themselves, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not my thoughts, I'm not this, I'm not that. And there's two main paths in the world, according to this Swami that was speaking the other night. He was talking about neti, neti, not this, or iti, iti, this. And Amma and Krishna also talk about this, about repeating to ourselves, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not this feeling, and I am the entire universe. And for me, repeating that to myself, almost like a mantra, is a way to not identify with the feelings. And what I was hearing from your dance is that by being with it, that the identification with the fear began to dissolve. And I think that this is a very important stage in the learning of the empathy intelligence, that we learn to not identify with the feelings. And Marshall Rosenberg talks about this as emotional liberation. We have choice whether or not to believe the thoughts. We have choice about whether or not to react to them. And I think it's also important, not just with fear, but also with the joy, because we can get attached to feelings that are more pleasurable. We can get attached to things that we like, and we can want to repel and push away things that we don't like. But if we get attached to the things that we like, that's also attachment too. And when we get attachment to the things that we like, we often want more of them. And if we look at what's going on in the planet, we have a lot of want more culture that hasn't learned how to just be with what is and sufficiently recognize the difference between wants and needs, or requirements and luxuries, as another way that I've heard it said. And and so a lot of what's happening on the planet right now is that with the human impact of getting attached to what we like, we're less able to empathize with non-human life. And so many animals are going extinct. So many rivers are filled with pollution and water, that's been contaminated. And we've forgotten how to empathize with all of our kinship relations that make life possible on the planet. So I think what we need to learn how to do is not identify so much with the fear or the anger, and also not identify so much with the joy and the pleasure. I think there's a difference between pleasure and joy, and I've experienced that. And joy. I ran into Pema Chodron one time in a Target, and it was just right after I finished reading her Wisdom of No Escape book. She was buying picture frames, and I was just so amused to see this Buddhist nun who I've revered in a big box store buying a picture frame. And I remember reading from her and also Chogyam Trungpa talking a lot about you know, the Shambhala warrior, the empathic warrior's path is about being with quality of sad joy in the heart, and I think that's a little bit different than pleasure, and and so I'm really grateful for this time on the planet where we have this opportunity to communicate and connect, and so many people are talking about empathy. I think it's really positive, and we need to keep doing that, and it may be hundreds and thousands of years before we come back to a fully empathic culture on the planet. But if we give up, then empathy starts to disappear. So if we can just try to be empathic in just little moments, they all add up to big epochs of time holistically.
Well, it sounds like you're starting off by saying that it's like you're wanting to kind of learn from all these different traditions and all these different cultures. So from the traditional cultures, and how have they dealt with fear? You know, how do all these different traditions, how do they deal with empathy and fear? What processes or ways or rituals have they developed that help them to kind of deal with life, I guess, in broader sense, and these qualities? Like it's like that one that kind of stands with me is you kind of like, since we're afraid of, if we're afraid, we're kind of like holding on and getting attachment. You know, we're going to die, you know, or maybe we get attachment. It's not like there's that one story you mentioned about you kind of let go of everything and you go into the river, and it's kind of like taking a symbolic, you know, baptism, I guess, of letting go of everything and having died. So you've already done it. So maybe when you come out, you're not going to hold as tightly to those fears of death or whatever. So there's...
Yeah, I don't know much about that tradition. I've certainly not taken that level of surrender in initiation by sannyasi, people who've been doing that for thousands of years. But it's very difficult to surrender the ego and fully immerse oneself in the infinite ocean of empathy. It's not the easiest thing, but learning to surrender to it seems like it would lead to the most liberation. And if we look at people who've reached fully awakened states, you know, they create clear pathways for it. Intellectually, I understand like what Byron Katie or what different teachers would be saying, that we're already the whole universe and we're already perfect. We don't need to be fixed and changed. Dominic Varder talks so much about that. But it's much different to know it intellectually and then parrot the words than to know it experientially from one's direct experience. So empathy seems to be a very experiential thing that needs to come into the heart. When I try to intellectually empathize or parrot words that I've learned from other people who've reached levels of empathic continuity that's amazing, I find myself in trouble. But if I can speak about empathy from the tiny little experience that I've had, you know, as a speck of dust in this universe, that seems to be more reliable and easier to trust. So it seems like part of building a culture of empathy would be creating pathways for everyone to find their own direct experience of what empathy is from the inside out, and then be able to bring that into the world and to give it to the world.
Yeah. Well, that's something I kind of deal with personally too, because I can be very kind of analytical and academic, or however you want to look at it, kind of detached. It's looking at things in the terms of a model. How does the model work? And I can viscerally feel where my consciousness is. It seems to be kind of in the head. But then there's another state that's kind of represented by that story I was telling about the fear. It's just seeing myself, it's seeing the world as the aesthetic experience, and kind of just speaking from, hey, what's my aesthetic experience at the moment, you know, from moment to moment. and how am I dealing with how am I dealing with that? How am I relating to that experience? And that one experience was kind of like a peak experience because I was like very conscious of the fears and able to go to those fears and to be able to do that in an ongoing way. And I haven't been able to get back to that state of to that peak. It was one of those peak experiences, where I was just kind of doing it ongoing, ongoing, ongoing. And so I do sense within myself kind of different states of being. Like there's the one where I'm kind of at that state of just being, seeing what's my experience now, what am I feeling? I can feel kind of a softness here. I can feel kind of a little anxiety because I always wanted these dialogues to be kind of interesting. So I feel a little bit of anxiety about this. I have to keep the conversation going, or I have to ask questions. and I need to make it interesting for people. Is this interesting? So there's a little bit of fear and anxiety within that. So I can kind of feel that in myself. And how to kind of deal, how to kind of be in kind of that state of being of, being present with that anxiety or those fears and kind of being present with them and kind of transforming them, but it seems like it's kind of like whatever is there, the joy, the fear, the anxiety, being present with it. And it always changes, right? I mean, it never stays constant. So,
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you're talking about is like, I can try to hold a certain state of being and it's kind of a losing. All it does is kind of create more anxiety. So it's kind of like it's more how can I be kind of present with everything that's happening, go to it, be present with it, but be ready for it to transform into the next, to wherever it's going to go next, and who knows? It's kind of a whole improvised. It's kind of like life is improvisation, but that seems to be part of it. The empathy is maybe the presence with those different feelings.
Absolutely. As I'm hearing you talking about the anxiety and the fear again, I've had a chance to look at many of the videos on your website, and I often refer people to have a look at them when I get invitations to share what I've learned about empathy. And I've been quite impressed with the scale and the number of people that you've had in your interviews. I really appreciate it as a resource on the planet for supporting the co-creation of empathic culture through us from divine energy, from presence. And one of the things I really enjoyed meeting Michael Dowd, the author of Thank God for Evolution. And he's also a feature in the Awakening the Dreamer Symposium. And I met him at Hummingbird Community some time back, and then I ran into him again in Oakland. And I was reading his book, and one of the things that I like about, and many sages and saints and wisdom teachers teach about this, is going beyond our animal nature. And in our animal brains, so much, had these fight or flight responses. And so for me, also learning about building a culture of empathy is not just understanding the spiritual nature, although spirituality is a science, I think, but also using modern science to understand the spiritual nature of empathy and brain chemistry has also been really helpful, because I think as many forms and tools as we need to understand what empathy is in order to be able to learn it, I'm guessing that the Mother Universe will give us every form that we need in order to understand how to be fully merged in the ocean of compassion, the ocean of empathy, and the ocean of the Mother Universe. She'll give us as many forms as we need to learn the lessons, because seems like the Mother Universe is keen on her children really growing up and maturing. And I think also in terms of building a culture these days of empathy, I've also learned, not just from Amma, but from many indigenous cultures, that reawakening the divine feminine, not just in women, but also in male-bodied people, um, is really important. And I so much appreciate you, sharing transparently about your feelings and your concerns here. And my father, he was about to get drafted into Vietnam, and he decided to become a doctor for the public health service instead, and take care of wounded people coming back. And he's one of my first role models of nonviolence in my life. And I've always appreciated that I've had a father that was willing to cry, and I've always felt much more safer to cry. And I realized that there's some crying that I appreciate myself that I think is healthy, and some crying that's maybe a temper tantrum and a waste of time at sometimes. And I think what we also really need is a lot of examples of courageous and willing men who are willing to say, oh yeah, we're learning how to embrace the divine feminine. We're learning how to embrace the universal motherhood within ourselves and bring that motherhood into the world. And there's so many beautiful examples of it. One of the first nonviolent communication practice groups I went to was hosted by a former police officer. And he started practicing nonviolence, and he was also a hypnotherapist, and was leading people through past life regressions. And I've just met so many men who are former Navy SEALs, former cops, former sheriffs through some of this men's work that I've been doing, and meeting these men who are incredible examples of men who are willing to embrace the divine feminine within, willing to talk about feelings and be more spiritually open to the motherhood coming through. And I meet it all the time. I've had the chance to ride so many first and third and fourth class trains around India, and I've met soldiers all over the place. And it's amazing living in India because there's so many soldiers who are trained in meditation in the army, and I think India has the largest standing army on the planet. But much of the time I don't see them carrying guns. In some cases I do. And they also practice meditation, and also can have many soldiers I've met who have such a gentle rapport about them. And I was empathizing with several police officers during Occupy Oakland soon after the murder that happened there in Oscar Grant Plaza. And I was in Oakland when that murder happened, in the plaza right there with several other restorative circle practitioners and people who know nonviolent communication. And I was empathizing with some police officers for several hours, and that went on for some time. And then I came back a few days later, and I met one police officer who he saw that I had some prayer beads around my neck. And he said, oh, I see you're wearing your prayer beads. And I was like, yeah, why do you ask? And he's like, well, I usually don't wear mine while I'm working, but I have these prayer beads too. And to tell you the truth, like, the thing that I go for first when I show up to a crime is I actually think about how do I approach this nonviolently first. And that was really inspiring to me. I've met several martial artists and former soldiers who've said to me, in order to know how to heal, you need to know how to kill. And in order to know how to kill, you have to know how to heal. And so when we have the opportunity to use our discernment faculties, which is so important for empathizing, I know that for my words, that my words can either kill or they can heal. And so it's amazing to be able to learn so much about healing and empathy from people who are also trying to protect, and sometimes using an incredible amount of force, and sometimes using an incredible amount of violent force. So I don't know if this world will ever be free of that kind of fight. And I don't know if when you're talking about building a culture of empathy, are you talking about building a culture of empathy in this world, on this planet, or with the entire universe beyond this planet?
I'm looking at our existing planet, this existing culture. It's like, what can we do to, within, at a personal level, we can deepen our empathy. I mean, you've kind of experienced that, I believe. within a family, you can, consciously say, hey, we want more empathy, and what are the ways that we can do it? How can we create the social structure, the rituals, the whatever it is that nurtures empathy? How can we do it in our neighborhoods? How can we do it in our cities and, country, and really the whole world? How do we just raise that level of empathy? Like, I know you've done restorative practices, and a lot of those can really nurture empathic connection between people. If they're in conflict, there's these tools for creating connection between people, which, all the mediation work, I mean, not all, but it's primarily around empathy, creating empathic connection, restorative circles, like I know you've done training in. So it seems like it's all doable. It's like it's all there. It's just disorganized, there's not a clear focus on the value of empathy. And so how do we I'm kind of looking at how do we create a movement and kind of work systematically in an organized way to really nurture it. And one of the ways, as you addressed it too, is a dialogue. How do you, and I've asked people, tell me how to create a culture of empathy. And you'd sent me a list here of, learning from different cultures, approach empathy holistically, and that there's empathy, reality is eternal. So to see it's a foundational value in all of us, really. We're kind of like wired for empathy. I think that's maybe what so it's all doable. It's just, can we get kind of organized? Can we, consciously bring empathy in a conscious way to society?
Yeah.
And the point I wanted to get to was about the dialogue. When I ask people, how do we build a culture of empathy? It's like dialogue about it. Engage people in the dialogue. So we just do what we're doing right now. And, we can't tell people you have to be empathic or, kind of force them, but we can create a dialogue about it where I can share why empathy is important to me. And I can say, how about we build a culture of empathy together? And the person says, no, I don't want empathy. And I say, well, let me empathize with you about why you don't want a culture of empathy, so that we can use the means of empathy, to create a culture that is more empathic. And, you start empathizing. I've been to the Republican convention, the Democratic conventions here, and, talked to all the different parties, been to the Occupy, been to the Tea Party, and everybody's, kind of wanting connection and empathic connection. And they're all saying, the other side's not hearing me. The other side's not, we want to be heard. So, it's like people want it. It's just like people don't seem to have the pathway to get there. So it's like, let's just create the pathway. It's a totally, I see it as a totally doable, vision.
Yes, I agree. One of the things I'm practicing right now is we've just had our first gathering called Practicing Compassionate Justice with Mother Nature. And it's a restorative circle practice group to work with conflicts related to ecological crisis. And in the practice group, we were working with the conflict issue about nuclear contamination in our water. And that's a significant issue in Japan, the water floating to California. It's a significant issue in New Mexico, where we have the Los Alamos National Nuclear Lab. It's a significant issue where I live in India, in the east there, when the U.S. and Iran and Israel are talking about nuclear war. I live across the ocean from that potential situation, and I so much appreciate your work because you're creating so much dialogue. And I walked out of the library the other day from preparing for this practice group, and I met a woman who's on hunger strike here in New Mexico, and Pancho Ramos is actually going to come out and give a talk at this rally about finding alternatives to nuclear weapons. And I was so impressed with this woman because she's on hunger strike, and she was saying, but do you know what? Los Alamos National Nuclear Lab, 1.6% of their budget is spent doing all these cool things like climate change research and developing sustainable technologies. How do we focus on getting Los Alamos National Lab to grow that way that they're spending money that's basically for empathy research, for supporting life systems on the planet? How do we let them grow this? So she asked me to hand out some flyers, and I started handing out some flyers around about her talk that's coming up on August 3rd and 4th and 5th. And, and this is all happening around the anniversary of the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. And one of the big blessings I've had in my life is be able to empathize with people who are born in Nagasaki or Hiroshima soon around that time, or meet with people whose ancestors were killed and be able to empathize with them. And I was handing out a flyer to this one woman, and she said, I don't want this flyer. It was a good thing that we dropped that bomb on Hiroshima. And I said, wow, inside myself, I have such an opportunity to not be a nuclear bomb, but I have such an opportunity to offer some like high powered nuclear empathy right now for this situation. And it was great. We had a dialogue for about 20 minutes. It was a dance between honest expression and empathy. And I felt incredibly connected to her. I could see the divinity in her. She wanted safety. She was a mother who wanted to protect her children. And sure, at the same time, I'd love to find alternatives that could serve all beings and not destroy people, plants, water, and air. And yet being able to empathically connect with her was so much more fulfilling than walking away holding an enemy image or having resentment or having hatred towards her. And I was able to do that because one of the ways that I'm learning about how to build a culture of empathy is through forgiveness practices. Actually, just before this, I was I had a noetic balancing. A healer was working on me doing energy work and empathy and belief transformation and forgiveness practice all at once. And part of what I've been forgiving in the last 2 years is forgiving all of my ancestors who've been fighting for the last 50,000 years, or forgiving all of my ancestors who are actually warriors in battles over the last 1,200 years, reaching back to my Scottish and Swiss roots. Because I carry all those genes and memories in me, birth after birth, the mothers give birth to these memories. And so doing some grief work, learning how to heal, letting go of the grief, coming back to presence. As I forgive myself, it makes it so much easier to forgive other people. And I was really ignorant to that for some time, and I've drained so much energy through blaming and fault finding in my life. I've wasted so much time. But learning how to even have forgiveness for thinking I should have done it differently. How else would I have learned but through the experience?
Yeah.
So I think forgiveness is really key.
Well, that's kind of what you're kind of talking about, is a bit of the approach that I'm seeing too, is for me to say that I want to build a culture of empathy. And it's like, do you want to build a culture of empathy? And if someone says no, it's like you just empathize with them and be empathic instead of, hey, I'm protesting this and you're the bad guy. And, I need to, convince you to, stop war or whatever in kind of a confrontational way. It's like you're kind of just empathizing with her and kind of like modeling connection. And I think that's kind of like the way forward, really.
Yes. Yeah, many saints and realized people have helped us realize that this world is a dream and it's an illusion. And one of the things I'm starting to notice is that if someone says no and I have resistance to it, it's a test from the universe around how empathic I really am and how attached I am to the sense of I and mine. Because if I'm attached to empathizing and not, being seen for being the empathizer, and I think one of the blocks to building an empathic culture is being attached to the fruits and being attached to name and fame for being the builder of the culture. But if I can be conscious and remember that the divine is the doer, that the divine is the empathizer, the divine is the builder of this culture, then I won't get so attached to the fruits and I won't get so attached to name and fame. And
so it's that sense of attachment, of grabbing and trying to keep things and hold things, that's kind of inhibits the empathy. And it's like, how do we kind of let go? How do we let go of the fears of losing? And how do we let go of those?
Yes.
Maybe.
be a fool to say that I've mastered all this. I'm very much a young student on the path.
Yeah, it's an ongoing dialogue. Well, one thing you're doing is some workshops. What were you going with? Like I see a website here. You're doing something called Fierce Love, like community intensive, or just something you could talk a little bit about the workshops you're doing.
Yeah, fierce self-love. Coming from learning how to transform self-loathing into self-compassion, and these are different tools and practices I've learned in kind of as a cross-pollinator around the world that have just helped me to come back to self-love. And when it's called fierce self-love, one of the things I like about Eastern spiritual traditions is meeting fierce aspects of compassion, fierce discernment, and also has a quality of gentle. So I think with fierce self-love, we can. One of the questions I've been wondering is if every person on this planet had fierce self-love, would there still be 30 wars going on the planet? And one of the things that I've realized is that some of the self-hatred that I've learned from in myself comes from having, disliked or hated other people and then regretting that I actually did that and being ashamed that I did that. And mostly that hatred has come from believing in the illusion of separation. And so if I can have fierce self-compassion for times when I really haven't acted in harmony with my values, or have fierce self-compassion for, the dirt. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about our latent habitual unconscious tendencies being like mud inside of our bodies. But if we scrape those with a salad fork or a salad spoon, if we scrape that mud into our heart, then it can bloom into a flower. So this community intensive was one person I've worked with in another co-creation called Dancing into Self-Compassion. She asked if I would put on this community series with a group, and it's a new experiment. Mostly I've shared this one-on-one with people, so to do it in a group I'll be standing at the edge dancing with my fear, stepping through that here. And we're keeping it about 20 people. It's a 6-week teleclass. And it's going to be happening over the phone around the world.
Okay, well, we've gone for about a little over an hour or so. Probably should wind it up, but it's been a lot of fun chatting with you, kind of connecting again.
Yeah, I'm grateful to hear about it, and look forward to seeing what movies you're putting out coming up, and also if it's possible to get a copy of this, I'd love to have a copy of it just so I could see how we're both talking, and just I used to watch a lot of sports highlights on ESPN, so to watch the empathic highlights on the Empathic News Network would be, I'd like the replay of that layup I did back in the first quarter of the conversation, so I can understand, how to play the empathic game with more skill so that we can all be victorious. I think building a empathic culture would be a way for everyone to win the game.
Well, this kind of gets put on YouTube, so you can download it and do anything you want with it, or repost it, or you can download it and cut out any piece you want, or it'll be there for everyone to see that wants to see it. And I hope we can kind of keep in contact, and maybe there'll be other things we can do. I'm kind of looking at using the video as a form for kind of group calls, panel discussions, empathy circles. So I'm just kind of looking for ideas on how we can use this technology to foster, building a culture of empathy.
Great.
So, just keep that in as a possibility.
Yeah, there's a program called AView that you might be interested out of India. I've learned about it at Amrita University. And, because India doesn't have so much access to really qualified, experienced teachers, especially in a lot of the rural settings. India has 1 billion people, and 70% of people in India live rurally. They're using a lot of satellite technology now to actually give classes out into rural places. And there's some pretty neat systems that the technology experts are building over there to be able to share educational forms like what you're wanting to create on a pretty massive scale. And also, I think they're trying to make it pretty affordable as well. So A-View might be one that you check out.
Okay, well, with that final tip, I will say goodbye for now, and hope to see you again soon.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.